reflect Pakistan as for the population and the potential?
Look, productivity increases when you and I or anyone working in a certain place, or I would say even further. Like take for example, my favorite example of this is in Islamabad. I think you lived in Islamabad too, and I used to give this example all the time to the Prime Minister, many people. We've got a convention center in Islamabad that I think everybody knows about. That convention center was built by Benazir in 1991. And quite frankly, I've checked many times and I'm asked, what is the balance sheet of the convention center? How much money does it make every year? And everybody's perplexed by that question because they think the convention center should not make money. Now, when I look at the convention center in DC or New York or London or Singapore or whatever, I've looked at these many places, they make tons of money. They are very profitable businesses. Why are we not making money of that? That's productivity. If the convention center made a lot of money, it would be productive. Right now, that convention center is useless. If you think about it, you go from the convention center right next to it. There is the Jinnah Stadium, which is an Olympic-sized stadium made for Commonwealth Games. Again, that's not making money. If you take the railway system, for example, our railway system is fairly extensive. It's a good system that we inherited from the Brits. We have not developed it. We have actually depreciated it. And that railway system not only doesn't make money, it doesn't even serve the people well. The trains don't run on time, they don't reach on time. Take PIA. PIA used to be one of the best airlines in the world in the 60s. Today it is almost dying. All the routes are gone. It doesn't make money. It's always begging for money from the government. And it is not an airline of choice. People would like to avoid it if they can. So I think these are the kind of things that we need to think. Our public sector enterprises as a whole are making a loss of something like, I think, almost combined 1.5 trillion rupees, which is almost 5 or 6% of GDP, which is a joke. I mean, how can these companies make so much of a loss? We've talked about privatization for the last 15 years. We have not been able to do, we've done some, I'm not saying we haven't done any, but we haven't been able to complete that privatization process. Our energy system is losing money like water. I mean, that energy system has lost, if I remember right, something like 4 trillion rupees in the last 12 years. Now, that's a huge amount of money for Pakistan. But we have not fixed it. We haven't been able to fix it. So my point is that unless we are capable of solving these problems occur everywhere. You've seen that problems occur everywhere. I mean, the US government is struggling with healthcare, and the US government had its own deregulation problems in Reagan era, and et cetera, et cetera. The main point of a society and a governance system is to solve your problems. Our problems linger on. For example, PIA problem has been lingering on for 20 years. Take our education system. Our universities have been declining over the last so many years. Our school system has been declining over the years. We can't arrest these trends. Unless you arrest these trends, unless you make your public sector enterprises solvent, unless you make your education system improve in quality and eventually catch up with the world, we will not have productivity. Productivity has to be based on two things. One is education, the ability of your people to be able to gain from the global knowledge pool. Two is their ability to work together and to do things that are capable of earning global competitiveness and earning rents from or profits from the rest of the world. This is how the world works. We, unfortunately, on both counts, we don't do well. Our education system is suffering. At the same time, we can't organize ourselves well, either at the government level or the private sector level, to be able to make large profits, which is why our exports don't go up and we end up into balance payments problems. Now, if you have a few companies like Google, or even, let's say, Finland has Nokia, if you have a few companies like that that are doing well, that are capable of organizing themselves in the international community to make large profits, then you grow and you don't have a balance of payments problem. Again, it depends on how these people are looking at a crisis. In Pakistan, what happens is that if we hit 5% growth, and if a little bit of activity starts, people get very excited. They think we've arrived. Because the perception of the people is really not about getting to a point. They have no destination in mind. I think our destination has to be that we should get into the upper middle income country. We are the 5th or the 6th largest country in the world in terms of population. We must get to be an upper middle income country. Our per capita income must go from the current 1,500 to at least 15,000-20,000. And if we want that, we have to grow at a very fast rate. We have to grow at least 7-8% per annum for 30-40 years for us to get there. In that sense, yes, our crisis will not end, to my mind, until and unless we achieve the kind of structural changes that are required in the economy to take us from the current trend of 4 or 5% of GDP. When I say trend, I mean the average. Over the last 50 years, if you take the average of the economy, average growth rate of the economy, we are growing at about 4 or 5% per annum. And I would much rather that we grew at 7 or 8% per annum. And that really is the potential that we have now. And if we don't grow at 7 or 8% per annum, we will, by definition, have an economy that will not meet our needs. And from that point of view, I think we should call that a crisis. The fact that we can't meet our potential is a crisis. But the mood of the people changes when some growth happens. So yes, when the growth goes to 5-6%, many people will be happy. When some activity picks up, many people will be happy. After all, on the happiness index, Pakistan shows to become happy very quickly as growth goes up. So I give you a qualified answer. I think yes, growth will pick up. I think yes, we'll come out of the current crisis. But the longer term crisis that we are stuck in, the low growth path that we are stuck in, another factor that I'd raise is our productivity is very low. What determines growth is productivity. Each individual, how much he can perform or how efficiently he can work. Now, that productivity is very low. We have to increase our productivity. So from that point of view, I think we can't be serious.
Sorry, that's going to come in the next. I don't want to mix.
Okay. Short-term economic recovery will happen automatically. I don't think that matters much. But for long-term economic recovery, I think what we really need, long-term economic recovery will take us from 5 to 6 to 7-8% of GDP growth. That requires deep structural changes in the economy. What do I mean by deep structural changes? It requires change in the way we do business. For example, governance. Very important point is governance. Our governance still is stuck in the 19th century. If you think about it, we still have the colonial system in place. Our bureaucracy is colonial, our judiciary is colonial, our army is colonial, our legal system is colonial. Everything that we have still continues in the colonial framework. We really need to modernize our governance system. We have to think about how the new economies are operating, especially with technical change and the globalization at work. We really have to have a different kind of an economy, a governance system in place, a governance system that's much more responsive to the world, to technological change. For example, in Pakistan, even today in the government, everything is done on paper, handwritten. We don't even use the internet or technology very much. We have to begin to change that. Then, for example, another thing, our economic strategies are still based on the 60s, what Dr. Nadeem Haque wrote, great economist, but that time has passed. We still want to build infrastructure through borrowing money. We still want to build big infrastructure. We still want to develop large industry, but we want to do it in the traditional way. We don't believe in markets. We believe in the government running business. For example, the government still buys agricultural product. For example, the government still subsidizes many industries. Most of the industries are subsidized. For example, the government is still building roads and large grandiose projects. Rather than thinking of developing competitive markets, well, we don't have markets in agriculture. Our stock market is not functioning very well. Our industrial markets are uncompetitive. So we have to begin to think of a market economy. We've accepted globalization. We have to think about a market economy and globalization. Our education system is not working at all. We are not producing world-class research or world-class education systems. I just finished a book on research in general in Pakistan, and I am afraid the situation is not very rosy. In this day and age, you have to have a very, very important research engine in any country. So we must begin to think about organizing our research, not just research, our human resource. How are we going to, for example, it's no use organizing education in a very traditional way in a technological age. We have to think about education in a very different way, like Finland or the Scandinavian countries. We have to reimagine these things. Again, at the same time, for example, investment, we have to reimagine the way investment happens. We still think of big factories and big lots, etc. No. Google and Apple are some small companies. I should say, take that back, not small companies, but they were companies that started 20 years ago and they're now the largest companies in the world. So we have to reimagine the way we think of business as well. Business can be virtual, business can be small. Uber has come from nowhere in 3-4 years and become a company worth $40 billion. This is how we have to imagine business and not think of business as a traditional thing with a state owning it and with, tons of big assets. So there's a lot of reimagining to be done using technology, using globalization, using human resource, and then obviously being creative about everything. And unfortunately, with the colonial systems in place, we can't. So the biggest thing that we had to do is change the colonial systems, modernize our legal system, modernize our governance system, modernize our education system, modernize the way we think, and more importantly, we also must have large debates on economic policy in the country. Right now, economic policy seems to be secondary. We don't worry about it. We are so worried about foreign policy and other things. Economic policy is not our bread and butter. Whereas if you look at China, Korea, or various countries that we admire, they have made economic policy their bread and butter. And they really think and dream economics in their country. So there are large changes that have to take place. Let's define what optimistic and pessimistic are. Pakistan is a young economy. By definition, the economy will start working again. And this has always happened. If you look at our growth path over the last 50, 60 years, or even 70 years, you'll see our growth goes like this. It's like a roller coaster. We grow for a year or two, then we come down. We grow for a year or two, we come down. Because remember, a young economy means people, children, kids like yourself, you have to go out and work. When you go out and work, you do make the economy work. People have to make a living. And they will go either overseas, domestically they'll do something. People will make money for themselves, and that will push the economy up. So I'm not a pessimist in the sense that nothing will happen. Yes, the economy will pick up again. But the question is, what do we mean by optimism, as I said? My optimism is slightly different from what the government or people think. I think given a young economy, and we did this analysis in the Planning Commission when I was there, given a young economy, we need to grow at a rate that is demanded by the young economy. We have roughly 2 million people coming to the labor force every year. We need to find jobs for them, otherwise, obviously, it is very destabilizing for society. And finding jobs for them means that there must be job creation in the economy. That can only happen if the economy is growing very fast. Given that, I define the baseline of the economy that is required to be 7 to 8% over the next 20, 30 years to be able to absorb this population growth and this employment growth. Now, if we can't grow at 7 or 8%, I find that unfortunately we are not meeting our baseline, our potential. Given that, we tend to get very optimistic when we grow at 5 or 6%, and everybody thinks, hey, 5, 6% is great. I think 5, 6% is not good enough for us. So yes, unless we reach the potential growth that we have of 7, 8%, we should be pessimistic because we are not going to hit that. And I think that's the yardstick that we have to define. We can be optimistic if we have 1% growth more or 2%, but we have to understand the underlying structure of the economy, where unfortunately, not unfortunately, I would say fortunately, where we do have an underlying pressure for growth by young people who want to work hard. We must utilize that, harness that, and be able to grow at 7 or 8%. Otherwise, I don't think we should be optimistic at small bursts of growth. The current government has done what every other government has done. It has started off by accepting the IMF program, which is fine, which is good. You need the international community to support you, so yes, you need the IMF program. The IMF program is very stringent. It is based on a huge amount of tax collection, almost 44% above last year, which is very, very big. It is based on a strong fiscal correction, which is required, but again, it's very strong. The devaluations happened, and the devaluation had to happen. Again, I hesitate to use the term devaluation because devaluation is thought to be something that the government does. But no, in this case, it was not something that the government did. In this case, it was something that the market demanded. And when the market demands, no government can stand before it. All governments have to bow to the market. So the devaluation happened. Where the government, I think policies can be adjusted and made better is because no government policy should be without a focus on growth. And what we've had in the last 13 or 14 programs of the fund that we've had, they have all been anti-growth programs. They've all been programs that have relied heavily on taxation. They've all been heavily relied on a fiscal correction, but there is very little growth focus in the programs. And that the IMF will claim that, look, our job is to just do the band-aid and let you get out of the emergency ward. It is the government's job to think of growth. And I'm afraid there is a huge paucity of thought in the government because the government capacity has come down, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. Unfortunately, the exchange rate will adjust if there is underlying chronic problems, just like your body temperature. Just like the temperature goes up, the exchange rate has to adjust. So I'm all for the exchange rate adjusting, but the program or the economic policies of the government need to be tuned much more than they currently are. Economic mismanagement, of course, has contributed to the current crisis. But as I keep emphasizing, it's not yesterday's economic management, it's not today's economic mismanagement. We have been mismanaging our economy for the last 40, 50 years, maybe even more. Maybe even from the beginning we've mismanaged our economic policies. Because think about it, when we got independence, the first thing that India did was it devalued its currency, and we did not. So there are similar other mistakes that I can point to. But quite frankly, we've had a crisis of governance for a long, long time. And unfortunately, right now, there is very little thinking capacity in the government to be able to frame better economic policies, to be able to think better economic policies. There is also very little capacity within the government to even debate economic policies. So we keep going to the IMF or the World Bank or whatever, we keep getting them to frame our policies. We don't discuss or debate them, we don't critique them, and we adopt them. So we've got all policies that are kind of born of foreign soil, that we have kind of outsourced our thinking overseas, and we adopt them, and then we look around and see, hey, how can this work? Unfortunately, we can't even implement them because we have no capacity to implement them. So to answer your question, I repeat, yes, it's mismanagement, but it's not mismanagement of today. It's mismanagement of the last 60, 70 years, and we really need to get our act together to frame policy better.